Hello, everybody. Welcome to Archeo Viking and happy Indigenous Heritage Month. In honor of this month and Indigenous peoples, I've decided to create a video about Mississippian cultures of the Southeast, specifically Alabama and Georgia. Now, I have previously made another video about pre-Columbian cultures of the Southeast and how culturally sophisticated they were. However, I feel this month calls for a much more narrow focus on one particular culture, that being the Mississippian cultures of the Southeast, because I feel the general public often overlooks the Mississippian culture of the Southeast in lieu of more popular cultures such as the Aztec Empire of Mesoamerica, the Maya, the Inca of Peru, and the Puebloan cultures of the Southwest. And that doesn't mean that those should be ignored. In fact, they are very culturally sophisticated and culturally beautiful cultures and societies who definitely deserve their attention. However, to ignore another culture is not a good thing. And that's why I feel it's important to look at these cultures, especially when Cahokia is generally the only Mississippian city talked about. And while it, again, is certainly a very important city, you know, it's only one part of the picture. If you only look at one part of the picture, how can you understand it? So what does Mississippian mean? Well, Mississippian is a time period where these pre-existing cities and towns, depending on your definition, I tend to prefer city, began to really take off. Like I said in my previous video on the subject, cities in the Southeast began to pop up really early on in the Archaic period, which was roughly contemporary with the Bronze Age in Europe, Asia, and Africa. But their population boom, at least in this area of the Americas, was not seen until the Mississippian period, around 900 to 1100 CE, and then continued well into 15 to 1600 CE. So, with that in mind, multiple cities began to rise. The two of the ones we're going to focus on today are Etowah to our left, which was established in what is now modern day Cartersville, Georgia, and Moundville to the right, which was established in what is now modern day Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And these were very large polities that were probably the seats of what are called chiefdoms, or confederacies of other city-states that come together under the rule of a paramount city-state or chief. And they oftentimes, as seen in the archaeological record, did war against each other. In fact, it seems their palisades that you see in the pictures that were built around their cities were probably built as defensive measures against warriors from their cities. So Mississippian societies in America as a whole can be divided into multiple different cultural groups, such as the South Appalachian Mississippian group, where we see Etowah and Moundville and Okmulgee and such, or the Cottowin Mississippian, where we see Spiro, another famous Mississippian city, and then even, of course, Cahokia in the Middle Mississippian cultural group. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to focus on the South Appalachian. So when did Mississippian culture spread to the Southeast? Well, Cahokia rose roughly 900 CE, maybe a little bit early, like 850 CE, to 1000 CE, between that time period. And then after it rose, Mississippian culture spread rapidly to the rest of the eastern woodlands, reaching the Southeast by around 950 to 1100 CE. Now, unfortunately, a lot of people still have this image of the American Indian as these primitive, sometimes hippies or primitive savages, which is not true at all. Just not true. I mean, war did exist, obviously, but war existed everywhere. And this rise of cities at this time is not unique to the Southeast. It's not unique to the Americas at all, because again, while cities existed in the rest of the world, around the 900s, you begin to see the rise of new kingdoms. Contemporary to this rise of the Mississippian culture in the Southeast and the rest of the Eastern Woodlands, you see the rise of Norman England after the Norman conquest of England by William the Conqueror. And also in Asia, you see the rise of the Sung Dynasty China, and you see also the Viking Age, which both rose and waned between this time period. So, not unique whatsoever. With that in mind, let's take a look at the cities that we're going to focus on today. The major cities that we're going to focus on today, and they're by no means the only ones, are Moundville, which, as I said, rose in what is now modern-day Tuscaloosa, Alabama, between around 1120 CE and remained prominent until about 1450 CE. Okmulgee, which rose in what is now modern-day Macon, Georgia, around 900 CE and stayed in prominence until 1350 CE, and Etowah, which rose into prominence around 1000 CE in modern-day Cartersville, Georgia, and stayed prominent till about 1350 CE when it began to wane, but it was also continually inhabited off and on until 1500 CE. So why did cities like these begin to rise? What was the cause or spur of this? Well, it's probably the prominence of chiefs or high priests or other important warriors who began to rise and gather people around them and began creating a socially stratified society that, again, was not unique to the Americas at all. We are well aware of socially stratified societies like kings and emperors and such in Europe, Africa, and Asia. So you can really see an example of this right here, where a daughter of a chief or a high priest or something like that is being carried on a litter by her warriors to what appears to be her wedding. And this is generally how chiefs, important individuals, were carried. They were carried on litters. We know this from the Desoto and Tristan de Luna and other Spanish expeditions and accounts that I will cover in a little bit. One of the ways we can see social stratification in the archaeological record is things like these. You see these copper bands on the top here that were worn on headdresses, and things like a scepter and copper gorgets that were worn around their chests and such, that were really not worn by commoners or general public. They were worn by important individuals like priests, chiefs, whether it be a peace chief or a war chief, or princesses, etc. And also, we see with this rise of social stratification, we see the building of even larger mounds than had previously been seen in the Southeast. And so, how did they build these mounds? Well, again, it goes back to social stratification. So if you're a chief and you can build large mounds like these three at Etowah, you're gonna, or these three at Moundville, you're going to need a lot of people. So with a lot of people, you gather them and they begin to build your mound by taking dirt in these baskets and filling them with 50 pounds of dirt, and they carry them one by one and pile up the dirt until they create these mounds. And you can see an example of this right here, where an individual is carrying said basket, and you can see an example of the basket on the left. But it wasn't just mounds that they helped build, or at least not just ceremonial mounds. We had things like earth lodges. Earth lodges were things that were mounds that were used for council meetings or religious ceremonies. Oftentimes they were filled with iconography like this eagle symbol on the left, as well as seating. You can see on the right examples of the rows of seating that went around the whole thing. And this is sort of what it would look like. You would have meetings here, whether it be for religious ceremonies or political ceremonies. So, they're called, like I said, earth lodges, and this is where the important elites would have their meetings. It wasn't just that, though. We also see the beginnings of the development, not beginnings, of very important artwork. Very beautiful artwork. We see elaborate pots. We see shells being used for a number of things. We see clay figurines. We see elaborate ceremonial garb and ceremonial blades. Shells being used for dippers. Shells being used as pins for hairs and other, pinning up your hair in gorgets. We see shells being made out of necklaces. Beautiful things. We see, other examples here, like shells being turned into the gorgets, carved beautiful images right here. We see carvings of animals, like a turtle effigy and the human head effigy. Beautiful, amazing artwork. We also see the rise of trade, or the re-rise of trade, because as in my previous video, we do see the Hopewell culture and the archaic cultures did have elaborate trade routes. However, the Mississippian is by far the largest. So we see Mississippian trade extending all the way to Chaco Canyon in the west, all the way up to New England and Canada, all the way down to the Gulf Coast, and even indirectly as far down as Mesoamerica and the Indian civilizations. We can also see examples of this, especially in the archaeological record, with things like carved flint axes in the territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, more commonly known as the Iroquois Confederacy. Their preferred term is Haudenosaunee. Which, what we can understand is these carved maces in Haudenosaunee territory are so rare because they are in Mississippian style, is it seems that these Mississippian maces were brought directly to Haudenosaunee territory as either attempts to make alliances or peace treaties during wartime, or both. And they generally come from Tennessee. So we can see right in the archaeological record how far this trade network goes. Other examples of that are things like copper from the Great Lakes that you see in these two pictures with these copper gorgets and these copper axes. So we know exactly the kinds of things that they were trading. Quartz from the Appalachian Mountains, etc. Seashells from the aforementioned seashells from the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Coast as well. But it wasn't just that. We also see the rise of ceremonialism, or re-rise again of ceremonialism, because again, the Hopewell societies did have ceremonialism, but this is on a completely another scale. We see things like ceremonial daggers and spears that were used and to pantomime out and act out battles on ball courts, mythological battles or historical battles. We're not sure. It could be both. But either way, they were doing these battles to tell a story. So very ceremonial. We also begin to see carvings in the shape of mythological creatures or spiritual creatures, such as the winged horned serpent on the pot to the far left, underwater panthers, mythological rulers of the underworld as they were seen in the middle, and of course the rulers of the heavens and the sky, raptors such as eagles and hawks and such, which you can see the outlines of here on the pot to the far right. So very ceremonial and spiritual events happening in these societies. Again, much like you see around this time in Europe and Asia, such as like the rise of Catholicism, the Crusades, Buddhism, etc. is not unique whatsoever. But we also see, unfortunately, increased warfare, because as I mentioned, the Mississippian cities unfortunately did war against each other, as much of the world did. It's not unique. Unfortunately, we can't deny that all humanity across the board did war. We can see examples of what Mississippian warriors may or may not have looked like. One of the best examples in carvings we can see, contemporary archaeological record, is the figure known as the Conqueror, where he is in armor, subduing another human figure, wearing a helmet, and armor, and a shield on his back. And here are two artist representations of that, with one being depicted in leather rawhide armor with a wooden shield, wielding a war club and a spear, while the probably more accurate picture on the right is showing the warrior holding his war club, and he has actually a copper band of armor with, again, a wooden shield, because that would make the most sense, on his back wearing his helmet. Because they did have copper, and it is described that they did wear some copper, though it also is described they wore rawhide, so it's certainly possible they wore both. But this is generally what Mississippian warriors would do. And as I said, they warred together and against each other all the time. We do see in the archaeological record these palisades beginning to be built around Mississippian cities, such as Moundville and Etowah, in defense against warriors. And it continued fairly onward, well past these time periods, such as with other Mississippian chiefdoms, such as the Coosa chiefdom and the Tuscaloosa chiefdoms, that did war against each other. So what type of weapons would the Mississippian warriors have wielded? Well, we get things like bows and arrows, which were very accurate and very deadly. And you have Stone Age technology. Now, one might ask, okay, if the Mississippians had copper and did war perhaps copper armor, why didn't they make copper weapons? Well, it's a rather simple answer. While copper weapons are most definitely sharper than stone tools, they don't last as long. I mean, yeah, they can cut good for 2 or 3 times, but what good is it if it only lasts 2 or 3 times? Whereas, they can cut great for 2 or 3 times, but where stone tools cut good for, like, say 20 times. So you can make a stone tool a lot easier than having to hammer down a sheet of copper or smelt a sheet of copper into a blade that'll only last a couple of times. So it makes perfect sense that while they did have this technology of copper, you would stay to stone tools because they were more durable and last longer. Also, you see things like the atlatl, which again, very accurate, very advanced technology, was actually more accurate than muskets, and was just as deadly. And so you see this right here. And so these are things that, at least the ranged weapons that the Mississippian Wars would be using. But were they all ranged weapons? No, not at all. You see also examples of war clubs. So you see on the far left, a war club that sort of looks like a sword. It is made completely out of wood. These are described in the Spanish expeditions exactly as you see it. They were more used for bludgeoning and breaking limbs. And then you have the other types of war clubs, or at least 2 examples. There are quite a lot of them. Right here, one in the shape of an axe and one sort of like a mace, that were also used, and they could be ridiculously deadly. And in fact, these Spanish expeditions and records talk about them being able to wield them with the skill and precision of sword masters in Europe. So they were not slouches and they were not primitive at all. So one might ask, if Mississippian cultures were this advanced, if they had this much social stratification, if they had this beautiful art, they had these large mounds, they had this beautiful religion, and they have had these powerful warriors, what happened to them? Why did they decline? Well, it's a rather simple answer. These people, specifically the Spaniards, which you can see two examples here. On the left, Hernando Desoto, and on the right, Tristan de Luna. They came through on their expeditions in the 1500s. Desoto, 1539 through 1543. He died on the way. He didn't come home, but his expedition did. So they came through, and after they came through the southeast, the Mississippians began to decline. So why did that happen? Well, I'll tell you right off the bat, it's not because of conquest. Not even a little bit. In fact, we're going to step away from the PowerPoint for a minute, and we're going to come over here to the Desoto expedition journals. These are the primary documents of the Desoto expedition. So something I hope to get across to you in this video is that the idea of European supremacy at the time and European superiority is a myth. It's a complete myth. It's a myth perpetrated by these individuals. So in fact, Desoto describes many instances where his expedition was almost massacred. So first, I want to elaborate how deadly the warriors could be, the indigenous warriors could be. So right here on page 57, on chapter 7 of on page 58, chapter 8 of the Desoto Chronicles, we read about how they first came across the American Indians in Florida, and they describe these people. They say they captured 4 Indian women and 20 Indians came at us and attacked us so stoutly that we had to retreat to camp because of their being, as they are, so skillful with their weapons. Those people are so warlike, so quick that they make no account of foot soldiers. For if these go for them, they flee, and when their adversaries turn their backs, they are immediately on them. The farthest they flee is the distance of an arrow shot. They are never quiet, but always running and crossing from one side to another so that the crossbows and arquebuses cannot be aimed at them. And before a crossbowman can fire a shot, an Indian can shoot 3 or 4 arrows, and very seldom does he miss what he shoots at. If the warrior does not find armor, if the arrow does not find armor, it penetrates as deeply as a crossbow. The bows are very long, and the bows are made of certain reeds like canes, and very heavy, and so tough that a sharpened cane passes through a shield. Some are pointed with fishbone as sharp as an owl, others with a certain stone like a diamond point. Generally, when these strike against armor, they break off in a place where they are fastened on. Those of cane can split and enter through the links of mail and are more harmful. So, reading this, it is obvious that the American Indian was not at a disadvantage at all when the Spanish began to explore through the region. However, I'm not done. With that in mind, you're like, okay, well, what about horses? They had horses, they had guns. Perhaps they eventually learned that these people were afraid of them and were weaker. No, still not. I mean, they did eventually come across victories, and horses did eventually become an advantage, but I'll cover that in a a little bit. So now we're going to come to where he entered the chiefdom, left the chiefdom of Chica. Here. Okay. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Okay, so you're trying. Yeah, okay, so here we go. Apologies for the delay. So this is chapter 16, and it talks about how he fled from the area of Chiaha. See here, and he, as it's described, annoyed at how the Spaniards were acting, the Indians began to get excited and to seize their arms. Some of them, with clubs in their hands, went to 5 or 6 Christians, who angered them, and with blows served them to their liking. The governor, seeing them all excited, and himself among them with so few Christians, in order to escape out of their hands, practiced a stratagem quite contrary to his usual disposition, which was very direct and open. And although it grieved him greatly that any Indian should dare, either with or without reason, to show contempt for the Christians, he seized a club and went to their aid against his own men, which was done for the purpose of assuring the Indians. And he proceeded to send a message to his camp for armed men to come to him. He took the chief by the hand while conversing with him very courteously, and with some of the principal Indians who were with him, drew him from the town to a level road within sight of the camp, whence the Christians began gradually to come under innocent guise and to take position round about. Thus the governor led the chief and his principal men until he got into the camp with them. When near his tent, he ordered them to be placed under guard and told them that they could not go until giving him a guide and Indians for carrying, and until some sick Christians come from Chia, whom he had ordered to come down to the river in canoes, and those whom also he had sent to the province of Chisca, who had not yet come. He feared lest the Indians killed both parties. So what you are seeing here is another example of non-existent European superiority. You are seeing his group begin to be massacred, and then rather than coming to his own men's aid, Desoto sides with the Indians of this chiefdom, and then promptly uses his favorite tactic, tricks the chief into coming with him under guise of friendship, and then takes him hostage to run away from the warriors of this chiefdom. Again, this is his favorite tactic. He does it all the time. Not really a sign of superiority if you have to take somebody hostage to not be slaughtered. And so with that, we also come to this, where after he does a similar thing and takes the chief of Tuscaloosa hostage, he continues on his journey until they come across the town of Ulibali, and next and reach the town called Tosai. Essentially, what this says, let's see here, is once he got here, he saw that warriors were beginning to gather to basically free the chief. And this is how he describes the town. Let's see here. Apologies, people. Yeah, there we go. It was learned later that day that they got to the town Ulibali. 10 or 12 of the principal Indians, all with feathered plumes and with bows and arrows, came to him on the road bearing a message on part of the chief of that province to offer themselves to him. The governor reached the town with 12 horses and some foot belonging to his guard, for he had left his men a crossbow flight from the town, entered therein, and found all the Indians under arms. Judging from their manner, he thought them evilly disposed. It was later learned that they planned to take the chief out of the governor's possession, if the chief requested it. See here. The enclosure, like that in other towns, was seen afterwards, was of thick logs set solidly together in the ground, and many long poles as thick as an arm placed crosswise. The height of the enclosure was that of a good lance, and it was plastered within and without, and had loopholes. On the other side of the river was a town where the chief was at the time. The government ordered him to be summoned, and he came immediately. After exchanging some verbal promises with the governor, he gave him necessary items and 30 Indian women as slaves. So what this says, essentially, is he feared for his life. This is page 94 in chapter 17. Essentially, he feared for his life dearly, realized that this fort was heavily fortified, and summoned the chief to talk the warriors of this village down, probably under threat of murder. Again, not really a sign of European superiority. So the last item I want to highlight is one of his victories, one of Desoto's victories, and that of the Battle of Moundville, where he did actually succeed in a battle against them. However, the inhabitants of the city of Moundville, which was the capital of the Tuscaloosa chiefdom, did not want them here, and so they started a battle. Now, like I said, Desoto did win this battle. However, let's read what actually happened. The Indians fought with great spirit, that they drove us outside again and again. It took them so long to get back that many of the Christians tired out and suffered great thirst, and went to drink at a pond located near the stockade. But it was tinged with the blood of the dead, and they returned to the fight. The governor, seeing this, with those who accompanied them, entered the town on horseback, together with returning foot. This gave opportunity for the Christians to succeed in setting fire to the houses and to overthrow and defeat the Indians. So here we are. While it was a victory, however, it was a hard-fought victory. Now, I should say that if I was a commander in battle, this is probably a similar decision I would have made. Set fire to the buildings. Very common tactic. But the fact that he had to do that at all to win after he had been outfought several times shows how equal Mississippian societies were in terms of warfare to the Spanish. So with that in mind, we will return to the PowerPoint. So, apologies. Sorry for the delay, people. Okay, so with that in mind, where did he begin to get his victories? Well, as I said, it wasn't anywhere around here. It wasn't in Coosa. He had one victory here in Moundville, but not really anywhere around here. So, which is, by the way, this is the first part of the route that Desoto took. So, where was this victories? Where did he get these victories? Well, he didn't start getting victories until he got around this area. So around Arkansas, uh, and Kansas and Texas. And that was because of two things. One, people and the tribes in this area were far enough away, they hadn't heard about him yet. They hadn't even heard about him approaching. Oftentimes, the accounts talk about him coming across a village of completely unarmed people, usually women and children, and charging at them with his horses and capturing a bunch of them. Other times, it is warriors, and he charges at them and wins. And this is largely because this area is also described as an area of vast amounts of cornfields. So very flat areas that are perfect for cavalry charges. This does not mean he didn't still face losses. In fact, he faced several defeats that, several ambushes that were rather costly. So he still, even then, faced losses and eventually was killed somewhere around this area, where the group then decided to try and make it to Mexico through Texas. Didn't go so well then, so they went all the way back around and went down through modern day Louisiana. Eventually, after that, Tristan da Luna returned, where he describes something completely different. And I'll link in the iCard videos of my mentor, Dr. James Langford, describing these events after the Desoto expedition in much greater detail, where the vast amounts of areas are abandoned. They're abandoned. There's been mass population decline, so much that even the chief of Coosa is no longer being carried on a litter. So why is this? Well, as we saw in the Desoto accounts, it wasn't because of some grand conquest, but disease. Unfortunately, the Western Hemisphere was cut off from diseases in Europe, Asia, and Africa, so nobody had immunity or resistance to it. So when Tristan da Luna came back through, he did actually see all these lands depopulated because of European diseases. So much so that Coosa, who at the time of the Desoto expedition did not need help whatsoever, was forced to ask the da Luna expedition to help them put down what they considered a rebellion from one of the cities in their chiefdom that refused to give tribute. While that being said, this decline being said, it should also be noted that the Juan Pardo expedition does mention the Coosa chiefdom still being around and seeming to have regained some of its prominence after the da Luna expedition, but it was very clear the Coosa chiefdom and other chiefdoms were beginning to decline around the 1500s, the late 1500s or the 1600s, when the da Luna and Juan Pardo expeditions were coming through. So with that in mind, where are they? Did they completely die out? Did the Mississippian societies completely die out? No, not even a little bit. Their descendants are right here in this area. Their modern day descendants are the Creek or Muskogee nations, the Natchez, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Caddo, and also the Seminole, who are themselves a mix of an intermarrying of Creek and other Florida tribes. And even to a certain degree, the Cherokee, while the Cherokee are an Iroquoian, the Cherokee, the Tuscarora, and the Catawba and such, and the Powhatan are Iroquoian. Sorry to the members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. The actual term for this language group is Iroquoian, so I apologize. The Iroquoian language group, or the Algonquin language groups, they still had cultural connections and ties with the Mississippian societies that we saw in, as I described, the trade links between these regions. So despite popular belief that the American Indian and Mississippian cultures went extinct, not true at all. That's unfortunately a bygone of the colonial era and early United States era, where they thought, oh, well, the American Indian was going to die off eventually, and we're going to inherit their lands. Not true. It's something that should be done away with completely. So I hope that I was able to convey this message to you about how fascinating these cultures were, and how completely equal in just about every way to the Spaniards who were exploring they were. And I hope you enjoyed the video, and hope you don't mind the minor pauses I made as I was trying to look through the pages of the Desoto expedition and had to get back to this slide I left off of on my PowerPoint. Again, I apologize for those, but it's still important for you to hear the exact words of the Desoto Chronicles as they were written down, which I will also source and cite in the descriptions of the video, along with my other sources. So with that in mind, again, happy Indigenous Heritage Day. Happy, celebrate Indigenous peoples. I suggest that you please research properly and learn about these cultures. And please like and subscribe and share this video. And have a good day.